Welcome back, everyone. We now will begin panel 3, which will address the processes by which transmission providers evaluate, select, and develop regional transmission facilities for reliability. Specifically, this panel will discuss how transmission providers evaluate potential regional transmission facilities for reliability to determine whether they could more efficiently or cost-effectively address an identified reliability need. Additionally, this panel will discuss cost management practices that require coordination between local and regional planning processes. For example, how to ensure that assumptions used in regional transmission planning processes enable transmission providers to accurately determine the more efficient or cost-effective transmission facility for selection in the regional transmission plan that may defer or replace the need for local transmission facilities. Similar to earlier panels, we will ask that panelists refrain from just reading their summary statements. We will also, I'll introduce you, and as a gentle reminder, please hit the mic button so the red light comes on, and if you would like to respond to somebody who made a statement, tent card goes vertical. Without further ado, just quickly introduce our panelists. Eric Heinley of the DC People's Council for the District of Columbia, Dan Conway, Commissioner with the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, Nick Guidi, Counsel with Southern Environmental Law Center, Kenneth Seiler, Vice President at PJM, Randy Howard with the Northern California Power Agency, Adrian Mouton Henderson with the Clean Energy Buyers Association, and Henry Tillman, correct, with Tillman Associates on behalf of Northwest and Intermountain Power. So without further ado, Mr. Chairman, I believe it is your panel.
Thank you, John. I will start off, and then we'll pass it around for some questions. I wanted to start off with an observation that it doesn't appear to me that there's a lot of regional developed reliability projects that were developed in lieu of local projects. And I'm wondering if you can speak for your various regions, if you could explain if that's correct, and if so, why, if that's a good thing, bad thing, if you not have sufficient information, or is the process in local planning working so well that you really don't need to have regional reliability projects replacing them? So maybe if we can go down, maybe from left to right, if that's okay. Start with you, Henry.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I would say in the Northwest, the regional planning process is getting better. There's been a market improvement since Northern Grid took over from Columbia Grid and over here. I think there's still room for improvement, and some of those ideas are in the comments filed, but I think.
There's the red line. Thank you. As I was saying, I think there's been some improvement in the regional planning process in the Northwest, Intermountain West, since Northern Grid took over. But I think there is still room for improvement.
So thank you for having me for today. So we are a trade association, but we do work in the West and the Southeast, and there is a vast difference in the transparency and the process of coordination in the Southeast versus the West. The stakeholder process is a little bit more robust in terms of us at least having a seat at the table, whereas in the Southeast, there is not that opportunity completely. I also feel that the ITM would help with that process, and I'll get into those comments later if I'm asked, but it's all over our NOPR comments, it's all over in the opening statement I provided today. But the regional transmission projects have, in my opinion, been stalled because there is not a coordination of efforts, and we need FERC to help us get there. So I'll let the other panelists speak, but that's initially what I'd say.
Good afternoon, Randy Howard from NCPA, and my view of the West is right now there's a lot of focus on repurposing existing transmission capacity from coal plants in the West to other purposes and transitioning those to renewable energy. So there's been a lot of focus and emphasis there on how to do that. Where we do more planning is looking at where some of these resources are going to be into the future. and just the focus of trying to ensure that we can get those resources to the markets, primarily in California. So it's getting better, but a lot of the effort lately has been on the repurposing of the existing transmission paths and trying to get better utilization factors out of those lines.
Good afternoon, everybody. To answer your question, at least for our region, I think, Chairman, is we have a highly networked sub-transmission system within our footprint. It's very tightly integrated. It's very robust. It's served us well for very many years. We still run the same battery of tests on the bulk transmission system that we do on the sub-transmission system. But a lot of times, because we're not experiencing high load growth, we're not seeing at least load growth spread across the entire footprint. We do have concentrations of significant load growth in certain parts of our system. That then is not really driving the need, but for some of those concentrated areas for large regional transmission. What we do, though, is we take a real hard look at what are all the sub-transmission upgrades, what are all the drivers that we have coming in to our system from a reliability viewpoint, from a congestion viewpoint, from a public policy viewpoint, and we look for opportunities for regional transmission. But in many cases, it's not the most cost-effective solutions. We have had occasions in the past, though, where we've had identified regional solutions. We could not get the line sited. The one example I can think of off the top of my head was about a $100 million regional transmission facility. Could not get the line sited. The commission wouldn't cite it within that particular state, and we ended up spending over $200 million for sub-transmission upgrades. There's other cases. I can think of one right now in central Pennsylvania that we're taking a real hard look at, where the sub-transmission upgrades are around $17 million. The more regional upgrades on the 500 and the 230 system are more around $25-30 million. So we take a look, try to balance it both ways. We take a look at what else is occurring in the area in terms of generation retirements, generation additions, other potential public policy concerns that some states may have, like retiring fossil units. And we try to look at a more regional solution. But in many cases, it's just not the most cost-effective solution.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nick Guidi, SELC. I'm going to talk mostly today about the Southeastern Regional Transmission Planning Process, or SRTEP, since that is the largest planning region in the Southeast. Regional planning in the Southeast is largely non-existent, and that is because SRTEP is very effective at what it was designed to do, which was to prioritize local reliability upgrades and not regional planning. Regional planning in the Southeast is largely a roll-up of the local processes with some box-checking exercises masquerading as regional planning. And whether I think that's a good thing or not, I mean, I don't think it's a good thing, but the fact of the matter is we just don't know, because the lack of transparency, lack of cost information, when these regional resources aren't actually considered on a holistic basis and not seriously considered, we don't know if we're choosing the most efficient and cost-effective process. It's possible that the things are working out as well as they can be, but the fact of the matter is we just don't know because of the way the process works.
Thank you. Dan Conway, Commissioner, Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. Thanks, Ken Saylor from PJM, for giving an outline of the PJM process. Ohio is, and its TOs are part of PJM. We rely upon PJM for reliability and for resource adequacy and reasonable prices through their market mechanisms. It's on. Can you hear me? No? Okay. All right. So do you want me to start over or? Okay. All right. I thought your question, Chairman Glick, is a good one. As I understood it, the question is, to what extent does the regional project category, the baseline project category in PJM, for example, is it able to incorporate and tackle some at the same time as it tackles a regional issue, a local issue? And the answer, I think, is we don't know to what extent that's currently happening. We hope it is happening to some extent. We'd like to get more confidence that, in fact, that is happening, that to the extent possible, regional solutions are addressing local issues, and that the local issues are, in a sense, that are capable of it, are being rolled up into regional solutions. So that's our hope, and I have a couple of comments I can make about what I think might be able to be done to try to get to the bottom of that and figure out whether there's a way to either make sure it's happening or max out the way it's happening. But yeah, I think it's a good question.
Good afternoon, Eric Heinley at DCOPC, and thank you again for the invitation to participate in this panel. I'm going to echo what Commissioner Conway said, and that we are concerned that there are far too many local projects and far too few regional projects. We have at DCOPC we have a great deal of confidence in PJM as the regional planner. The staff that's under Ken Seiler is excellent. Their expertise in engineering and power flow analysis is a world class. But we see far too many instances where PJM is not acting as the regional planner and bringing regional projects to the region, and that has a lot of potentially bad impacts on consumers because we're missing the opportunity to address local issues through regional projects. We also have issues of jurisdiction. For example, in the District of Columbia, many of the projects that our ratepayers will be rate-based for will be built in Maryland or will be built in Delaware or Pennsylvania or Virginia. And when those are local projects, we don't have an opportunity to really participate in the process for selecting those projects. When they're selected through the regional transmission planning process at PJM, we do have an opportunity to participate in that. And so again, that creates a jurisdictional issue as well. But it's an excellent question, Chairman.
Well, maybe Mr. Conway, I should say Commissioner Conway, I apologize. I was going to ask you this question, which I think you were probably going to address anyway. So what can we do? What additional information do you need? What process changes do we need to better consider regional?
Well, just to first, thank you, Eric, for your comments. I want to start off by saying that I'm not sure, I'm not at the point where I can say that we're missing significant opportunities to handle local issues through regional solutions that we're not already capturing. I think it could be probably as a case, not 100% sure to what extent it's happening or whether it's happening. And your question is what solutions might we come up with that could achieve the objective of either figuring that out or gaining some assurance that we are reaching that goal. It is a good question. Ken points out some of the difficulties in citing regional projects that maybe aren't facing the local category, and the result has maybe some unfortunate consequences for achieving that goal. That's one kind of bad example. I would say that it seems to me that the possibilities come from the likelihood that some local projects, not all local projects, but some of them may be actually having a positive contribution on the regional reliability results. But they're identified as a local project, so they have local benefits also, possibly, not probably, certainly. And so they're a local project, and they're to some degree a regional project. But when they are in the PJM process, if they're classified in the local category, they're out of the regional review process, and the focus then is out of the PJM review then basically stops and they go forward as a local project. What I would suggest is considering having a part of the process be that the TOs list or forecast, project, or collect their local projects that they're on the drawing board, have them provide their forecast of projects to PJM, of local projects to PJM in a fashion that's timely enough, early enough in the process, so that PJM then can then look at the local needs, look at the regional benefits that those local needs-driven projects are also providing, and possibly co-optimize a regional solution that captures those projects, puts them through the process of them through the baseline project mechanism, and leads to a shift of some of the local projects into the regional category. The benefits of doing that would be, and frankly, that the process of review and evaluation is more rigorous, and there's more stakeholder involvement. And there's also the option for those projects that get into the regional baseline category to have a competitive alternative that could drive potentially a better result than one that's simply driven by the TO itself without the option of competition. So how do you do that? How do you make changes to the process? I just go back to the point I made just a little earlier, that if we could somehow have the list of projects, of local projects, shared with PJM early enough in the process before they become accomplished fact on the local side, but before their urgency on the local side also is adversely affected, have them run through the PJM process for the regional issues, and maybe pick off some of those local projects and have them included in regional solutions. So it's kind of a timing issue that I would suggest considering.
Thank you. To the question of what more can the commission do, I think the reality is a regional planning process should include some component of really getting at the question of what is the biggest bang for our transmission buck. And the current process doesn't really do that, because what it does is it collects the local plans, bundles them together, tries to identify from those projects what regional plan what plans are regional in nature and should be pursued. It never really gets to the question of how do we upgrade the transmission system at the lowest cost to achieve the need. And, in the Northwest, we're looking at pretty significant requirements for new carbon-free generation resources. And the question that the regulators in Washington, Oregon need to know is, how do we integrate another 3 to 4 gigawatts of renewables for Seattle and for Portland? And the regional planning process currently never really addresses that question. And that's that question, and the answers coming out of the regional planning process are what the state regulators in the Northwest need to make informed decisions about generation and transmission approvals.
Appreciate that. I think my time's up, so I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Clements.
Thank you. Nice to see you all. Thanks for being here. I'm going to start. Do you say your last name, Guidi?
Guidi.
Guidi, Mr. Yep. Guidi. You did a great job in your comments of outlining the SCRTP process and the SCRTP process, or whatever that acronym is. And in our panels this morning, we've had representatives from Florida, customer, North Carolina, public staff, and then the southern states, utility. I'd be interested if you could share a little bit more about your perspective on how the transmission planning, the reliability transmission planning process goes in the Southeast, and whether or not some of these solutions under consideration, including the ITM, but I want to make sure I say it's not limited. There's other things we can do related to helping this process. How is it an appropriate? Are the solutions we've been talking about, including the ITM, appropriate for a region like the Southeast?
Sure, thank you. We usually call them SIRTEP and SCRTEP, so pretty close, but it's kind of disgusting sounds. So I heard what was said on the earlier panels today, and I think Mr. Burleson from Southern maybe characterized the holisticness and the comprehensiveness with which the states review transmission plans maybe overstated some things. Georgia's IRP process is one of the more fulsome in the region, but even there, they look at Georgia Power's 10-year transmission plan, and really their consultant looks at it for reliability and compliance with NERC standards. There's no kind of holistic long-term planning or assessment of the plan as a whole. It's really just will these get the lights on? Which is it's good, but it doesn't get to the cost containment aspect, which is looking at things early and looking at potential alternatives. I think the process, and I'll also look next to Alabama, which doesn't really have an IRP process compared to Georgia Power. Every year, Alabama Power develops an IRP, but there's no proceeding at the Alabama Public Service Commission where witnesses testify, where discovery is had. So we don't always have this fulsome review of a comprehensive plan. It's usually a piecemeal approach, which often happens in the CPCN process. But even there, in most of the CPCN processes in the Southeast, they only look at new lines. So if any lines are upgraded or rebuilt or just completely wholesale replaced, there's no CPCN for a lot of those. So they don't show up until they're just an expenditure line item in a retail rate case. I think some of the processes that could help CERTEP more comprehensively look at regional plans are, one, transparency. Right now in CERTEP, there is no planning level cost estimates for any of the projects that you see. So it's really difficult when cost is the only comparison for regional facilities. It's hard to propose a project when you don't know what the costs are you're comparing them to. I think that something along the lines of what the commission proposed in the NOPR would help for reliability planning as well. I would quibble with the premise that changes to the resource mix are exclusively a public policy issue. I think they are often a reliability issue, especially in the Southeast, where public policy does not really drive changes to the resource mix. It's economics, it's corporate commitments, and it's consumer demand for clean energy. But I do think, and you heard it from Mr. McLaughlin from the North Carolina Public Staff, that some independence in this planning system would be very beneficial. And an ITM would be a tremendous resource for states who don't often have the resources to monitor the process. And even when they do, and he mentioned that they're hiring a consultant, it's kind of after the fact, reviewing individual lines. They're not participating at CERTEP or in the local planning processes. And so they're not seeing it as it's being planned. They're seeing it once something is decided. And so I think, in addition to the states, stakeholders could really use that resource. Stakeholder participation it's declining in CERTEP, mostly because there's not many roles for them. The main role for stakeholders is picking economic planning studies, which don't ever go anywhere. And so adding that resource that can pool resources of stakeholders and can help the states, I think would be very helpful for the Southeast to push things along.
Thank you. And could you also speak to the relationship between how to think about it, I guess, from where we sit at the commission, the local and the regional planning, the relationship between the two in vertically integrated states where that is done in a combined basis?
Right. So, it's a little different in the Southeast. Most of the vertically integrated utilities have their own local process, but its local process is also CERTEP. So the problems inherent to the regional aspects of CERTEP kind of trickle down to the local aspect. But the local planning processes happen on their own, and then they're brought together for the regional process, and then just studied for liability, make sure that they're all feasible and that there's no unintended consequences. And that's mostly it. And so the only difference for the regional process is that a couple projects are floated every year for potential that might be more cost effective or more efficient, but they're never found to actually displace any local projects. And so they go nowhere. And that is the main reason why there haven't been any regional projects in the Southeast.
Thank you. And following up on Commissioner Christie's good question from this morning, and maybe open this one up to others who commented on the potential for an independent transmission monitor already or who want to, what specifically might an ITM do in your region or the regions that you are active in terms of responsibilities, buckets of responsibilities?
So I think very important. It would be important that the ITM has access to all the information available, which is all the planning models, all the assumptions that go into planning, and cost information, so that they can independently verify the plans the utilities are looking at. But also, I think really important is that they can look at alternatives and actually propose alternatives if they'd like. They can consider make sure that there are some considered, and so that there is kind of this independent entity that doesn't have an incentive like the utilities to avoid regional projects, that can actually look and assess whether there is some efficiency there that doesn't happen. I think reports would be like common or regular reports that when they audit the process would be important. But also, as was discussed earlier, I think they could be useful expert witness in the state proceedings, CN proceedings, IRP proceedings, where there's having an independent voice that's not part of the process, show how the process is going and whether it is the most efficient and cost effective would be helpful.
Thank you. We can go to Mr. Tickman, Ms. Mouton Henderson. How do you say the beginning of your name? Mouton, sorry. Mr. Howard, Mr. Seiler, and Mr. Heinley.
Yeah, thank you. I think the reality in the West is if you're doing a regional transmission project, you've got 4, maybe 5 states, plus probably a federal government agency, the Bonneville Power Administration. And is it really more efficient to require each of those individual states to staff up to do that sort of independent analysis of the transmission proposals? Or is it more efficient to have a single entity who has the expertise, who can provide each of the states consistent information about a proposed project? And I think it would be more efficient to set up a independent transmission monitor to look at the regional plans, provide some insight, maybe consider alternatives. Certainly they're not going to issue an order requiring something to be built, but they can provide information to the states, to the whatever agency has jurisdiction to consider a transmission expansion, whether it's in their own state or 3 or 4 states over. Just some good information that gives them confidence that they have the information they need to make an informed decision for their ratepayers.
So everyone said similar comments, but I think the ITM, if you look at it like we did the market monitor, everyone complained when it first was raised. It's new, it won't work, it's gonna stop the system, we're just gonna be stalled out. And that's simply just not been the case. In fact, what it's done is show where there needs to be work done. And I think that's what the transmission monitor would do. The reports that we publicly read and available to stakeholders is part of the meaningful stakeholder engagement we're asking for. The business as usual model to building transmission is not working. So we need another layer of due diligence, not bureaucratic tape. And I don't think that's what the ITM is going to be there for, to also look at regional transmission planning in a new way. Band-aiding the system right now and putting the same assets in place is not helping us get renewables there. It's not helping corporate sustainability goals. It's not helping us get to clean energy. Transmission lines need to be rebuilt. They need to be upgraded regionally, and we need to make sure that we do it in a cost-effective manner for all ratepayers, no matter what sector they are. And we simply aren't doing it right now. So this would help.
So I think Mr. Hurd in the last panel discussed it a little bit, that in California we have a negotiated process with the 2 larger investor-owned utilities, but still for one of them, 76% of their annual investment in transmission activities doesn't go through a participating process, right? So I think there's some opportunities here because the negotiated process we have today expires next year. And obviously having somebody involved, and one of the things we've learned in the last couple of years in that process is there's also issues with execution. The utilities put forward capital plans and activities, but maybe they didn't get it executed or they're way over budget. And I think the ITM has some opportunities to really question, do you have sufficient resources to do this projects or these projects that you're putting forward in your budgets and collecting money on? Because too often we saw projects in there and dollars allocated, project didn't get done, but those dollars still got spent on something else. And we have an opportunity, I think, to manage the cost a lot better and the project activity as it's being proposed. Because right now there's not a way for us to do that. And others have also spoke that we just don't get access early enough in the process to influence the prioritization of what's important for reliability and resiliency. And obviously, through our wildfires and other activities, we've seen where some of our projects that we tried to impress upon those utilities that should be done earlier weren't done, and then consequences occurred once fires started.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just a few thoughts here. So our local planning criteria and our regional planning criteria, all our market efficiency criteria, all public policy needs are already identified. We have that. We post all the local criteria. Everybody has access to that. We have assumptions meetings every single year to understand what some of the aging infrastructure items are from each one of our utilities. That's made public. And all that information is put out there, at least initially, in order to make an informed decision around what the system needs in order to be reliable. In terms of an independent transmission monitor, I think it's very important to at least define the scope and understand what their roles and responsibilities would be within this process and how it would be integrated into our existing processes. And it would have to be something, if anything, that would have to be able to have an engineering background to understand what their scope is, to have the background and expertise to understand asset management, because a lot of the things that are coming through the local plans are basically aging infrastructure. We have some transmission owners who have transmission systems to the tune of over 2,000 miles of 70-year-old transmission lines. And that's throughout our footprint. We have 85,000 miles of transmission. We have an aging system, much like other transportation, bridges, other things. So it's no surprise that we're replacing a lot of the existing infrastructure, which is good. It creates a lot of headroom for other generators. It creates a lot of transmission capability to move power up one of the bulk transmission systems so it can be distributed to the loads. But there's a lot of concern around where the money's being spent, what the prioritization is, visibility into things. I think we need to start peeling the onion back to understand, what does visibility mean? What do our consumers need? What do our stakeholders need in order to be assured that we're coming up with those best solutions out there?
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'll certainly agree with a lot of the comments that have already been forwarded on behalf of the benefits that an ITM could provide. One of the things from DCOPC's perspective, we certainly feel that just like the independent market monitors, each region should be able to develop an ITM that suits their region, their transmission system the best. But certainly one role that we've thought about that an ITM could serve is in the last couple of years, we've had a discussion at PGM about SIP 14, critical infrastructure facilities. And these are obviously facilities, transmission facilities, that you can't have the normal good, transparent stakeholder process for. But an ITM could be in the room with the RTO, with the transmission owner, and helping guide that process in a way that would still ensure the safety and security of those projects, but also ensure some independence in that review process as well.
Thank you very much.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here, helping us sort through these critical issues. My line of questioning is going to go to something I'm calling prioritization. And so I want to begin with a question for the entire panel. And this one gets to, we talk about containing costs. And, really, you hear people say all the time, the cheapest megawatt is the one you don't use. I like to say the cheapest project is the one you don't build. And part of that, I believe, is grid enhancing technology, or GETS. So for everyone, I'm curious to know, when do you think within the process in your region or your state or in your commission, when do you think GETS should be considered throughout the process? I read recently that some jurisdictions, some other countries, actually require that they be considered at the very beginning of the process before you move forward with any type of plan to build something new. Any thoughts you might have on that? Mr. Stein.
Thank you, Commissioner. My initial reaction on GETS, and we put this into some of our comments, is that I think the industry would be served very well right now, frankly, if we would develop an application guide to explain where certain grid enhancing technologies can be applied in the most cost-effective way that would have the biggest bang for the buck. There's a lot of reluctance on behalf of our asset-owning utilities to apply grid-enhancing technologies, frankly, because of things like the reliability, the insecurity of those things, an additional avenue by which we could be attacked from a cybersecurity view, any number of things. And these things have to be reliable. From a pure planning viewpoint, in my mind, there's very few grid-enhancing technologies that can be relied upon on a day-in, day-out basis where I know I can count on having that extra transmission capability. They're a great operational tool. They're a great tool to get us out of some very hot temperatures, cold temperatures, and things like dynamic line ratings that can be applied on the physical transmission line to squeeze out a few more megawatts from a pure system operations view. But from a planning view, I can't count on wind. I can't count on having shade along the right of way. I can't count on certain things. I need to be able to count on it from a pure planning view so that the operators have the tools that they need and the flexibility they need when those unpredictable circumstances happen. Be happy to talk more, but I'll shut up there.
Yes, thank you for the question. Obviously, as of last month, when we hit peak week in California, we learned a lot of additional things about the greater need on some of the local and having some of those potential resources or other enhancements that we could have to keep the system operational. Obviously, we also put forward lots of emergency alerts and other things that allowed all kinds of backup generation to operate, diesel generation, everything was available was operational. And still we had some real challenges. But we've also learned from our wildfires and some of the resiliency needs there that there's additional transmission paths that could assist in at least keeping some of the power on in some of those regions and locations, some of the transmission requirements that, where some of those folks that maybe rely on wells, had they had power and been able to have local water, might have been able to save their own homes and things. And so we've learned some hard lessons, but I think we're doing a better job there in California now looking at that. But it has to be at the very early stage, and it has to be with the viewpoint and the stakeholders' input as to how this prioritizes versus some of the other enhancements that can take place.
Talking about demand response and the role that it can play as a grid enhancing technology. I really was struck by the fact that over Labor Day week, where Texas, man, I'm having trouble talking today.
Spreading.
California, where the governor sent out 27 messages to customers asking them to reduce their demand, to not, set their thermostat below 78 degrees, to charge their EVs at night. People responded, and over 2,000 megawatts in demand was almost immediately reduced within minutes. That's a capability I'd like to see whether or not it had broader application in other regions.
Yeah, I think every one of the utilities also put out information to their customer base based on the systems they had in place. And so there was a very coordinated effort. The governor's office had 2 meetings a day, in morning and afternoon, going over the loads with the CalISO and all of the affected utilities that were involved. So very coordinated, did a fantastic job from that perspective. But they utilized that 2,000 megawatts was really what we would utilize as normally an Amber Alert, or if there is some impending missile attack, and it went over everybody's phone, television, everything. I can tell you, I have elderly parents. They were scared to death, and they shut off everything, TV, everything, because they thought it was a disaster coming. So it was a very fearful approach. I don't know that I would recommend it again. We need to find some better ways to do that, but it was effective.
I agree with you. A last resort is what it was. And a lot of people say, and I think you might agree, it played a huge role in not having rolling blackouts in California. All right. Anybody? Yes.
Well, Kylie was first, and I wanted to my former colleague, but I'll be short. So I'll just say that when we look at GET, SEBA thinks that you can add another layer of resilience. And so you look at Babcock Ranch, Hurricane Ian just came through, and that ranch was the only one still surviving. I mean, they were solar, they had storage, they had battery operation, they were utilized as a rescue facility, and they were 20 minutes away from Fort Myers. They were the only ones still with lights on. So we have to look at grid enhancing. Apologies. We have to look at grid enhancing technologies as not just something to be used later. We need to test them. We need to put them in the beginning of the process, as Mr. Howard said, because they can add that additional layer of resilience that we're looking for in the system and to optimize the grid. Heinley, I left you a minute.
So as I've often learned, I shouldn't contradict anything that Ms. Mouton Henderson says, because she said it perfectly. We do think that GETs can be used in the beginning. They should be used as part of regional planning. I think what Mr. Seiler said is in terms of developing a manual or a guidebook as to when GETs should be applied is useful. But again, I'd probably take a little bit of an issue with the idea that they can't be a planning tool. As Commissioners, you said, DER served as a valuable planning tool in California a few weeks ago. And when you hear comments like, well, we can't always count on this or that, those were similar comments that we heard about solar and wind not too long ago. We found ways to incorporate them into the grid and to use them as in our planning for resource adequacy. So similar with studies, similar adjustments can be made with GETs too.
Thank you for that. Coming back to you, Ms. Moten Henderson, you talked in your comments on page 16, my staff says, about co-optimization of generation and transmission. I think that's an interesting idea. Can you talk a little bit about how you think FERC might be able to incorporate that tool into what we do?
Page 16, right? So the way we looked at that is there has to be a mechanism to optimize, and we're not getting the full optimization of resources available to us. And by utilizing both, we can do that. We've not done it before, it's new, but we have to think outside the box, and so innovatively. And I think that's where we need assistance. I strongly support you all having a standardization of benefits and how we're going to quantify those. It's needed. We have to do that. Like, it's not working. We can't keep letting TOs tell us what they're doing, what they're not going to do. We kind of have to have a standardization, non-RTO or RTO. If we want a robust build-out, cost-effective build-out of transmission, we have to standardize those benefits.
I knew that you would be ready. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
As far as optimization, I mean, I think the best tool you have would be to expand the number of scenarios, the type of scenarios that must be considered, not that may be considered, that must be considered in the regional planning process. I'm not going to tell you to tell each region which questions to ask. I think you can allow each region to identify the key questions for them, but requiring the transmission planning process to really to confront those questions head on and provide answers for the region is something that you can do, and that will allow an optimization, because you will in different scenarios you can consider different generation portfolios from the ones that the utilities have put up, and you can look and see actually that solution is better than the one that came up through this bottom up regional planning process.
I have 2 minutes left. Quick comment, then I have a question for Mr. Howe.
Okay, very good. Just one thing, I want to make sure we're not confusing terms around. We have this concept of resource adequacy, and we got to make sure we have enough generation in order to optimize the system. Certainly, if I have a data center that's 10,000 megawatts and I can put a generator right there, I don't need any transmission. I can pump it right into the data center, perhaps, right? So when we talk about optimization, it's very case specific, it's very location specific, it's very regional specific. Like I said initially, we have a very extensive subtransmission system. So we optimize the system as it exists today. And we look for different solutions around generation, transmission, what's in the queue, what's not in the queue, what's coming. But in some cases, it's not possible. So we just want to make sure we're not mixing terms around resource adequacy and making sure we have enough generation, including installed reserve margins, with optimizing generation to locate generation against a load, and then optimizing the transmission in such a way, or distribution system in such a way.
Thank you for the clarification. And really, I don't have a final question. I have a bit of a comment. And this is sort of in the, in the wake of what I said at the top of the day, talking about just customers with energy burdens. You mentioned in your comments, Mr. Howard, that in California, that transmission costs make up a third of the cost of an average customer bill. And I was chair of the DC Commission, and it was 10%. And I thought that that was too much. And then even as the chair of the commission, I felt as though I had no control. And so really my comment is just, we have to focus on this because of what we talked about at the beginning, the energy burden on customers. Any comments or reflections you might have on that?
Yeah, thank you for raising that issue. Obviously, in my comments, I also project out at least where we think the costs are going, and they continue to increase at an exponential rate into the future as again, California is changing a lot of its energy mix and the need for additional transmission build out. I think CalASO's 10-year plan is about $20 billion of additional transmission capacity. So at the forefront of that, we have to consider that burden and cost to the ratepayer, because we're now seeing transmission costs that are exceeding our generation costs. And that's becoming quite difficult for the customers. As I mentioned, in California, during peak week, we made it through that disaster, but the disaster that's in front of us today with all of our utility members is sending now the price to the customer to recover the cost of those extreme prices that were paid for that capacity and energy during that peak week. And it's hitting very hard for some of those customers. And so, yeah, we have to be very sensitive in all of this transmission and how best to optimize. And so we're looking at utilization factors. Don't build a path to a solar farm that's a 26% capacity factor without some other types of resources to get up that transmission utilization factor much, much higher. Find other joint benefits there, or storage that might be at the location of the generation versus down at the load.
John is getting nervous because we're entering my playbook now. And so I'm going to stop myself. I thank you all. I know everybody wanted to comment. I turn it back over.
Thank you. I want to, first of all, go to Mr. Conway, Commissioner Conway of Ohio, and I want to follow up on some earlier commentary and some written things we've seen. Dan, tell us in Ohio, do you as a Ohio Commission, what is your authority to issue or not have the authority to issue a CPCN for a transmission project? Where's the cutoff? What are the metrics? What is your authority?
In Ohio, there's an agency separate from the PUCO, although the chair of the Ohio Commission is chair of this other agency and relies upon the staff that's permanently assigned to the PUCO to help do the work, called the Ohio Power Siting Board, OPSB. And transmission lines, major facility, the Power Siting Board requires certification, permitting for major utility facilities, and in the transmission category, it's 100 kV and above. And there is, as Lisa McAllister mentioned, there also is a short form process if it's 2 miles or less in length. So that's below 100 kV. There is no permitting.
Above that, do you determine in a CPCN proceeding? Do you conduct an evidentiary hearing to determine need and prudence of cost?
Former, yes. It's a certificate of public convenience and necessity. We rely upon, frankly, we meaning the Power Siting Board, not the PUCO. The Power Siting Board relies primarily upon the work that PJM does in its planning process to provide the evidentiary basis for the need determination.
So at the PUC in Ohio, you basically have to take the PJM record as evidence of need? I mean, it's conclusive, or you don't get to do your own contested proceeding?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm just explaining to you what the course of conduct is typically.
Right.
And we do rely upon heavily on the PJM process and its results.
But could you do a contested proceeding where you dig behind that and you question it as you wish, and you?
Yes, we could. And as others have mentioned, there is an expertise issue that does affect our ability to do that, at least in the short run. We don't have for regional for transmission lines that serve regional projects, or any kind of projects, even if they're not regional projects, the ability to do the modeling, whatever other evaluations would be necessary to come to a contrary conclusion or to what the PJM process produces would be a heavy lift. And I recognize your point that in the first instance, all of us should heal ourselves and help self-help ourselves. But the practical point is that we don't have the expertise on hand. We rely on PJM. I will also point out that if a project is a regional project, it's not just it has regional impacts, then the analysis really probably goes beyond what Ohio, what's affecting actually the circumstances in Ohio. It becomes a more complicated exercise than if it is a localized project that doesn't have regional implications.
But you're aware of that project, the regional project, I think actually Mr. Seiler referenced it, where it was going to go through Pennsylvania and Maryland, and one state rejected it because they said it doesn't benefit us. So, I mean, they had the expertise, or at least they thought they had the expertise.
Yeah, that's a fair point, yes.
Yeah.
That did happen.
Let me go to Ms. Mouton Henderson and Mr. Guidi, and I hope I got the pronunciations right. So you both don't like the Southern process. You don't know, you both, I think you said system's broken. Let me ask you this, and I think you said it was less than transparent. Here's what we do know about these non-RTO Southern states. The rates are lower. The rates charged consumers are lower than in many of the RTO states, much lower than California and New York, to pick a couple of examples, much lower. The reliability metrics are very good. So what's broken? I'll start with Ms. Mouton Henderson.
So I used to work at Louisiana Public Service Commission in a former life as a staff attorney. And what's broken is part of the stakeholder process. We don't have the expertise. So as many panels have said already today, the information is there, but it's not given. And when it is given, what do we do with it? And then as someone who formerly served at Louisiana Public Service Commission, we didn't have the expertise on staff, nor do we have the time. I mean, we're just covering a lot with a little staff.
Right.
So...
Well, Louisiana's in MISO, right?
It is in MISO.
So I'm talking about the non-RTO states.
So you want to talk about Southeast primarily, like
yeah, the non-RTO,
Georgia,
the
North
non-RTO,
Carolina.
yeah.
So I will say this: the stakeholder process is a check-the-box exercise.
Okay.
It's not real. We don't get a lot to say, and when we do say it, no one's really listening. And the data that is provided is subpar.
Well, let me ask you this: Google's one of your biggest members, right?
They're actually, yes, they are.
Okay. And they care about rates, and I know I've heard it from them, and so if the Georgia Public Service Commission or Alabama, South Carolina has a CPCN proceeding where the utility, whether it's Duke Carolinas or Southern Company, wants to build a line, Google could come in and intervene, right? Would they have the ability to come in and intervene? They have the resources, that's for sure.
Yes, and they do.
And they do.
And they do.
Right. So they can represent themselves in a CPCN proceeding if they think the line is not needed. And I agree with Commissioner Phillips, 100%. Cheapest line's the line that doesn't get built. Okay. So if Google thinks that a line is not necessary, they can go and intervene in the CPCN proceeding and challenge it, correct?
Right. The problem, though, is that by the time the process comes along, and sometimes it's already, there and going to be built, as a ratepayer, beyond just Google, as a ratepayer, how is it possible for us to now say that the cost you spend is not prudent when the standard sometimes is just otherwise? It's very broad.
So you think that the CPCN process in the non-RTO Southern states is just not robust enough? It's not robust enough, and it's really just not working. Okay, even though they have lower rates than the rest of the country and good metrics.
But the costs are still high for those low-income ratepayers.
Could be. And so the CPCN process is just not robust enough from your standpoint?
In my opinion, yes.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Guidi, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would just echo that. I know the rates are comparatively lower to the rest of the country, but energy burdens are some of the highest in the country, and that it's all relative when you factor in other standard of living and other expenses that folks have to pay. I think it's especially important now because there is going to be a lot more transmission investment with the way the economics and demand are shaking out, and with the IRA recently passed, there's going to be more transmission to link these new, cheaper resources and retire a lot of coal resources that are currently operating in the Southeast. And so as that builds, we want to make sure that we're looking at transmission costs in the most cost-effective way possible. And the way it shakes out right now in CERTEP, you just can't do that.
So do you think that you're concerned about too much transmission being built then in the Southeast, too much and driving costs up, right?
I'm not concerned about too much being built. I'm concerned about that we're meeting the transmission needs in the most efficient way possible.
Need being reliability or something else?
Reliability, economics, anything.
And so you don't think the CPCN process as it currently exists in the southern non-RTO states is robust enough? Is that fair to say?
I think it's piecemeal. So it's not, it doesn't look at the whole process from the beginning and look at, the most efficient, longer term, is holistic a process as possible, which you lose some efficiencies when you just look at individual processes.
So, if we do have time, I just wanted to ask one other question that came up earlier. Mr. Sauer, you mentioned optimization, and that's what we're all here about, right? And this panel in particular, the question is, are we optimizing the planning and the transmission development process? And it confuses me that, you were saying earlier that, that we're PJM optimizing the process. A lot of times you don't need those regional projects, but it does strike me that there's a lot of transmission being built, a lot of local transmission being built, and it very well may be that the local transmission is necessary, but the incentives are in many ways for the local utility to build that local project as opposed to facilitating a robust regional transmission development process, because one, you get to build the project, and you get to obviously the state has to approve the certificate, but outside of that, you get to build the project, you get your costs recovered, and as Commissioner Christie mentioned this morning, you get to earn a good rate of return, and you don't, and even more importantly, you get to avoid a competitive process if you don't build it regionally, right? If you build a local project. And so I'm just wondering, are we really optimizing this PJM, and the PJM process in particular, because we hear about it a lot, are we really optimizing the transmission planning process by essentially just saying, go ahead, build all those local projects. We're not going to do this at the regional level.
Well, so some of the examples I think we can get into, obviously, is where we have let's just take a data center growth in the Northern Virginia area. Let's use that as a basic example. We pretty much tapped the subtransmission system. So those were the most cost-effective upgrades that we had available to us at the time. We're in a position now where, because of the growth rate, we need to go to regional solutions because the subtransmission system's completely tapped out. So in that case, I would argue we absolutely have to go to our regional system. We got to take a look at regional solutions to serve that load in that particular area, and that load's growing outside of that particular area as well as we sit here today. Where you have large load growth, regional solutions make a lot of sense. Where you have maybe large pockets of generation, we've given examples before with some of the interconnection reforms that we've talked about, where you have large pockets of generation. I think it makes a lot of sense to have large regional solutions there because you can get that generation up onto the transmission system so I can deliver it across the entire footprint. Where I only have a limited amount of generation and the subtransmission system can handle it, I think it makes a lot more sense just to upgrade that subtransmission system. The other example I'll give you, Commissioner, is something very simple. If we look at our costs per mile to build subtransmission, so if I look at like a 115 line, a 138 line, it may be $1 million a mile to rebuild that line. If I look at a 500 kV line, it may be in the tune of $7 or $8 million a mile. So it's a factor of 7 or 8 times on a per mile basis to build that transmission system out. So I don't disagree that there are occasions where we have large load growth, large pockets of generation where the regional solutions make a lot of sense. Regional solutions make a lot of sense where the sub-transmission system's completely just tapped out. We have a very tightly integrated sub-transmission system, though, that has served us very well. It's very, very close to a lot of the customers in a lot of cases. We're very sensitive around some of the power quality issues, the reliability of those sub-transmission systems, because they directly impact customers, direct. Whereas a 500 kV line could go out, nobody ever knows it. We could have a 500 kV line go out right now, nobody will ever know it because the lights don't blink. A sub-transmission line that goes out, customers feel it, customers see it, and that's why there's a lot of focus, I think, by the asset-owning utilities who are responsible and have the obligation to serve those customers and are the ones entertaining complaints from those customers if those lines are less than reliable.
And I would just say you laid out a very helpful approach for how the process should work, and maybe sometimes it does work that way. Based on some of the comments that we've received, it doesn't always seem that thought process takes place, that we're looking at is there a significant amount of generation coming in? Is there a warranted for a regional approach? Sometimes it seems like we just punt and go right to the local approach.
And look, I mean, this is a very complex thing. We have a lot of tools in the toolbox that we can apply to different things. We're looking at those effective things. I'm looking at all the different drivers, all the different changes in generation, changes in load, changes in demand response, changes with whatever maybe is on an aging infrastructure list somewhere. There's umpteen different things we're looking at that eventually for us as part of the RTEP has to be integrated into a regional plan at the end of the day. And those things are all being examined. It's not always obvious how they're examined, and it's very complicated. But believe me when I tell you, we do look at any number of factors that are available to us to keep the costs low, to come up with cost-effective upgrades. And finally, the last thing I'll say, and I won't here certainly, but the last thing I want to do is rebuild a 115 line or go out and build a greenfield 115 line between Pennsylvania and Maryland, for example, and then we didn't have the foresight to know that, hey, 2-3 years later, we're going to have to upgrade that same line to 230. I don't want to get into that game. You all don't want to get into that game either. We want to provide some level of foresight, which we try to today with our 15-year planning process.
Thank you. Mr. Tillman, did you have?
If there's time, I'd like to respond to Commissioner Phillips' comment about the increase in transmission cost component versus generation. And it's been a few years, but I remember reading all these studies about the decades of underinvestment in transmission. And I also think that, as we shift to location-constrained resources that are carbon-free and don't have a fuel cost, and build the transmission out to get those resources, I would anticipate that the ratio of transmission to generation cost would change and with a higher burden on transmission. And that doesn't concern me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do have a staff question here. I want to ask you about the interaction between regional and local planning. And I feel like this question is most acute in PJM and MISO. But to the extent that there is a local transmission facility that after some analysis has determined it can be, bumped up to a higher voltage to address a regional need, is based on the diversity of opinions that we have here and various regions, do you think that there's any commonality in that kind of analysis that could be applied across the nation? I recognize that not every transmission need is the same, and that there are certain factors, but is there any kind of least common denominator from that kind of analysis that could be applied on a larger scale?
Can I respond to that? I'll take the first shot at it. So certainly I think when we're looking at the system as a whole, we're looking at all our local planning criteria for the sub-transmission system. We're looking at our bulk transmission planning criteria. We're looking at everything. We're running the analysis together. We're not doing it in separate, distinct buckets. It's all included, and it's all comprehensive. And the whole battery of tests that we run every single year is included in that, whether it's is it generation locating in the area? Is it sustained low growth? Is it trends that we're seeing based on a state public policy that wants to retire fossil generation? Absolutely. And we take a look at that today. I have one case today that I'm looking at that exact thing. In fact, there's 2 cases. So what we look at is we try to look at trends, and we look at trends over a 15-year period. We're saying, hey, we're getting up around 97, 98% loading on this one particular line, and we're toggling between overloading and not overloading. So as we see something like that, and we think there's an opportunity, we'll go ahead and put that into the plan and consider a potential upgrade. And then the question is, do I upgrade it with a larger conductor and keep it at the same voltage level? Or to your point, do I upgrade to 115 to 230? And those are decisions we make based on an ever dynamic changing transmission grid. And that's some of the things that go into that.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Yeah, I'm not MISO or PJM, but I'm Cal ISO, and I used to run the power system for Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And there's some common pieces that would apply across the country, but I think each region does have some very significant differences. In the West, obviously very long lines. And the one thing, just the pure physics of it, most of California's load is along the coast. Most of the generation is somewhere inland from that. I mean, there are coastal generation, but from a physics, you either pull that power in or you push it in. And rotating machines, we're very good at that. And as we're transitioning our resource mix, the upgrades and how we're utilizing the system are all changing because we no longer have these big rotating machines all over. That's why in California, green hydrogen will probably be cost effective very soon because we have to have some other local rotating machines available to assist us in that process because the physics themselves just don't work well otherwise.
Thank you. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll give myself the pink card. All right. That concludes panel 3. So we'll take a 5-minute break and come back with panel 4. Thank you.